Hello and welcome to the first Ombucast by Ombu Labs. In this screencast, we'll be taking a look at the derailed benchmarks gem and how you can use it to benchmark your Rails application and find and hopefully fix bottlenecks in your code. There are two ways you can benchmark your application. One is statically, which uses your gem file to check for any gems which might be too big, which take too much memory. And the other one is dynamically. To be able to run this, you will need to be able to boot your Rails application in production mode locally. To be able to run the benchmarks I'll be showing, you will need both the derailed benchmarks gem and also the stackprof gem. To show how the gem works, I created a test application which just returns an array JSON which has many users, and it's a Rails 5.2 app. So it probably won't be similar to results you may get from your own applications, but it's good enough for just showing how to apply these techniques. So the first thing that you should do is finding out which one of your endpoints is slow, be it in production or in development. Usually you will want to optimize your production endpoints. And when you do that, you will need to measure how many iterations per second the endpoint can do. This is to get a baseline, an idea of how many or how fast your endpoint initially is. And then when you optimize, you can measure if the optimization was good or not. So our first step then would be to run the IPS task that derailed benchmarks provides and specify that our path to hit will be users JSON. So we run this task and it will give us a number, which is the IPS, the iterations per second. In this case, it's 263. And this is the starting point. So any modifications that we do to the code should not make it fall under 263 iterations per second for this endpoint in particular. So to start optimizing, one thing we can do is to run the stackprof task that derailed benchmarks provides to find where there are any potential bottlenecks. Like before, we specify the user's JSON endpoint and run the stackprof task. And we get this output from stackprof. The methods on top are the ones that took the most CPU time, the logger, the garbage collection, and then there's one that probably jumps out, which is time parse, which we're using in our controller here. And it's not exactly a very time-consuming task to parse the time, but since it's hard-coded, we can use time at, which is slightly more performant than time parse, and it will accomplish the same result. So what we can do here is to check in a Rails console. We can cast to integer and we get the time that we can use for passing to time at. And then we should do the same for the second one. If you apply this kind of refactor in a real application, note that this should probably be constants and not just magic numbers. So now we can run the stackprof task again. And yeah, time parse should now be gone. This doesn't necessarily mean that your iterations per second will be better. It's a good indicator, but you still need to double check. So we can check our IPS again. And they're roughly the same as before, which makes sense since it's a very small modification and also a very small app. What we can try and do is make other changes to our app, and one such change can be the optimization of this code here. This is actually instantiating one user per iteration. So for each user, we have to instantiate one object, one user object. So to save memory, we can introduce a gem. It's called plug2 hash. It acts like active records plug, but it produces a hash like the JSON we are trying to produce. So let's try to install it and see how our iterations per second change, if they change. And now we can run our IPS task again and measure the change. And yeah, that's a noticeable difference. There's about 60 more iterations per second. Like I mentioned before though, this is a small scale application, so you may have similar results or you may not. It depends on your application. Since our Rails application is serving JSON, another gem we can use is called OJ. It stands for Optimized JSON, and it's a faster JSON parser than the default that Rails uses. We'll install it in our app by adding it to the gem file. And then we need to create an initializer. And we can check our updated IPS. And that's another performance improvement there. Almost 400 iterations per second from 320 and 270 before that. That's almost 100%. You should keep in mind though that all of these improvements should be done with a good test suite, since you should make sure that these changes don't break compatibility with your current application. And again, these modifications that we did probably don't make much sense in an application this is small, but hopefully you can apply them to your larger Rails applications. And on a final note, you should benchmark, improve, rinse, and repeat. I hope you found these techniques useful. Let me know in the comments if you have doubts about any of them, and I will see you on the next episode.